Okay, so today I am educating a teenage girl, and specifically her grandmother, who has suffered from the effects of complex trauma. She was in foster care briefly as a child. She was born addicted to drugs, and then her grandmother received her at 16 months. And so recently, over the summer, she was sexually assaulted by a neighbor. And although there were some behaviors prior to this, acting out behaviors prior to this, where she was lying, stealing things, kind of being defiant, they've been escalated since then. And now she's having some sexualized behaviors as well. And so, grandmother and and I, along with the teenager who we'll call Ariana, um, she came out and she's, frustrated, and she feels more or less that Ariana is is really just disrespectful and has no respect for her and has no respect for her rules or the house, or anyone in the home. And so I am going to be explaining what trauma looks like and how it can kind of take the shape early on, and what happens after having such a significant thing happen to them over the summer, and how that could look like, what that could look like afterwards. So here we go. I just jump right into it. So when we think of trauma, um, at least for me, when I first started learning about this, trauma was something I kind of associated with medical trauma, like someone having a concussion, or someone maybe getting into a car accident and being really hurt, that type of thing. But in your case, Ariana, trauma for you is more or less what you were exposed to, that, you know, in terms of experiences. So very early on, even before you were born, you experienced trauma. So you were in your mom's belly, and she was using drugs, and you were born addicted to cocaine. So that in itself has a lot of physical effects that could come out um, at times where, we might, not really understand why we might be angry. Um, And as a child, grandmom, you might have seen some of these effects where she might have been defiant, or maybe very hyperactive, which is a main thing I think I remember you telling me. So, but then on top of the fact that she was born addicted to drugs, she also was removed from mom's care and placed in a foster home, which we have no information on. So, for 16 months. So from birth until 16 months, you received her. So we have no idea what was going on in those situations. And we would love to hope that she was put into a loving home where they, doted over her and they cared for every need, but we really don't know that. So very early on, Ariana, you were taught, and this is some of the research that I've been doing on my own, by someone named Rothschild and also Vanderkolk, who mentioned that very early on, you didn't really learn to attach to your caregivers. So, grandmom, if you kind of look at it, she's not necessarily taking as much as you've given her this great home and you've given her everything. She had 16 months of just inconsistency. And so, although, yes, we can work very hard to reverse the effects of that, it's going to take even more for her to kind of overcome that, because she doesn't understand what it's like to be healthy attached to someone who's taking care of her, because she was kind of essentially ripped away from mom very early on. So, on top of having, that, she also um she also was experience something very, very, very upsetting and very hard over the summer when you were assaulted by your neighbor. So I know that you had mentioned before that she had been stealing, lying, some defiance, but now it's kind of like, oh my goodness, she just dealt with this, and now she's going out and she's being sexual with other, with boys in the neighborhood, with older men. And I know, Grandma, that's really frustrating because you're thinking, oh my goodness, she just went through this. Um, how how are we going to be able to get through this now? Is she going to set herself up? Is she going to did this really happen, or did she kind of take this on? And you know, that is a normal thing. You know what I mean? Because um as we enter, that period of where, you're still pretty young, you're what, 13, you're starting to learn kind of what's appropriate boundaries between boys and girls, and what is what's appropriate in terms of how to interact with them. So your first interaction, a sexual interaction with someone, was someone who took advantage of you. And so there, you only know what's to be expected. You only know what, how to kind of proceed in those situations based off of that experience that you had. So it is not, about her kind of, trying to get the attention of boys, or doing things out of spite for you, Grandma, but rather she learned this um, based off of that experience. And so now we have to work really, really hard and be very diligent and very patient on trying to kind of reversing that the way that she kind of handles those boundaries with her peers. Because again, you're right, we can kind of run into an issue where she ends up becoming assaulted again. And it's going to take a lot of patience, and it's going to take a lot of you're going to be frustrated because this is years and years of different trauma and complex trauma that kind of set the stage for how Ariana views the world. And so, we have to be mindful and of that when we kind of work with her. Like, this is not that she's not being spiteful. She's not. Maybe it might appear that she's being manipulative, but this is how she learned, you know, to react to something that might have been scary growing up. So that's that. Okay.